Good evening. My name is Jenna Birch, and I am the Director of Alumni Relations at Westchester University. Thank you for joining us for the WCU 150 History and Heritage Exhibition Lecture and Tour Series. Before we begin, I would like to let everyone know that our next lecture and tour will focus on WCU's history and innovation and education of wellness professionals. Please save the date for Wednesday, February 2nd at 7 p.m. and register online at wcualumni.org. You can also find the complete list of upcoming lectures on the Alumni Association website and recordings of previous events. Please remain on mute until the end of this presentation, at which time you will be invited to provide feedback and questions related to the subject. For the best experience, we recommend having your viewing screen set to speaker, which will allow you to view the presentation in the largest format. This can be found on the top right-hand corner of your screen. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Museum Director Michael D. Giovine and our guest speaker, former Executive Deputy to the President, Larry Dowdy.
Hi, and welcome once again to our next installment of our thematic tour and lecture series for the WCU 150 History and Heritage Exhibition. As Jenna said, I'm Michael D. Giovine. I'm an Associate Professor of Anthropology at Westchester University and Director of the Museum of Anthropology and Archeology, which is located in Old Library. I'm also the Director of the Museum Studies program. And this exhibition, which is in the Francis Harvey Green Library, the new library, if you will, is the capstone of that program. And we do have here with me actually two, not just Aaron, but also Julia Zom and Aaron Stoyack, two of our student co-curators who've been integral to working on this exhibition. And of course, we have Larry Dowdy as well, who is also integral. You really work very hard with our students and advise them in putting together this exhibition. I want to give one word really quickly about this for those of you who haven't actually come and visited the exhibition yet. First of all, you can always visit it online. We have a 3D virtual exhibition. It's great. Jenna will put the link in the chat. It's wcupa.edu/WCU150 virtual exhibition. And you can explore all of these objects and artifacts and labels and timelines and even oral histories in detail at your own leisure. But if you do want to come in here, what you are seeing here is a room that's filled with a lot of memorabilia, but it's organized in two different ways. The first one is that you see here an entire timeline that goes around the room, starting from our beginnings in 1871, actually before that, when we were a normal school that was created to teach high school age students how to be elementary school teachers, all the way through our different eras, the Westchester State Teachers College era in the Roaring 20s, the State College era, where we became one of several Pennsylvania State liberal arts colleges, and then of course the Westchester University, the largest of the PASHE schools, our fully funded state liberal arts and then we do these deep dives. The students who planned this since January, we had 15 of them, really wanted to explore certain diverse themes that are associated with our transformations from this normal school to the large comprehensive university that we have today, specifically in the realms of student culture and student life. We have diversity, race, diversity, and inclusion, which of course is the topic of today's event, and also academics and And Aaron, it's great. You've done a lot of these tours, as Julia has done a number of them, and we'll be doing some more as well. But you really worked with Larry to really make a very compelling and comprehensive set of installations about race, diversity, and inclusion. And we'll hit on this as we go along. But let me pass it over to you both here, and why don't you give us a tour of what we have here?
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Giovine. I'm going to start off with our very first two minority students, two Cubans who attended in the years 1880 to 1881, Jose Galbani and Antonio Valdez. Now, they started just before our fourth principal's tenure, George Morris Phillips, and under him, enrollment of Latin American students exploded from places as close as Mexico and as far off as Chile. Looking through the undergraduate catalogs during his time, we found that at its peak, the school enrolled as many as 3.4% students from these countries, while the general US population was only 0.6%. One of the other very important things Phillips did was bring a number of guest students, guest speakers such as Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, to talk about their experiences, their lives, and what they saw as racial issues in America. Here we have a book signed by Frederick Douglass, given to George Morris Phillips right before his last lecture, before his death. Mr. Dowdy, do you remember any other guest speakers for civil rights?
Sure, we had a number of speakers that I recall. I was here as a student from 1969 to 73. We had Dr. Van Hooks, who was the executive director of the NAACP. We had Dick Gregory, who was a comedian and an activist. We then had Muhammad Ali. We had Maya Angelou. So Westchester was a place where many of the prominent African-American speakers would stop by, in addition to entertainment groups also of the time. Also would note in terms of Frederick Douglass that one of our former faculty members, Dr. C. James Trotman, was instrumental in doing much research on Frederick Douglass. And we'll talk about him later in regard to the Frederick Douglass statue.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because I have a question about all these Muhammad Ali, Maya Angelou coming in the 60s. So we know why Frederick Douglass came. I mean, you know, Phillips, one of the things he did was he collected first edition books and he would sign them and send them out and say, can I have your autograph? And then he'd kind of use that as a hook to kind of bring people to start correspondences with them. And he was corresponding with Frederick Douglass and kind of, you know, told him he should come, you know, or they discussed coming here. Why in the 60s, why did we have such high profile people in the 60s? Do you have any?
Well, the one thing is that these individuals, not just these speakers, they would do a college circuit,
Right.
make money, but also they wanted to be part of, I mean, they were part of the civil rights movement. So colleges and universities wanted to have them on the campus to give their various speeches and the like. So that's what I think was going on. It was part of really a college circuit on civil rights.
Sure, that's cool.
Now, Maya Angelou is acting around. And, you know, she wasn't during the time that I was a student here, but she was here during the time that I was working here as a professional. But many of the civil rights leaders, Jesse Jackson and the like, were here. Again, he wasn't here when I was a student, but he was here, you know, whatever.
Cool, yeah.
Yes, so also around this time in 1896, we had our very first Native American student, Nellie Robertson. She was from Sioux, South Dakota, and she went on to teach at the Carlisle School. 1898 brought a lot of Cubans in Port to campus with flags hung in dorm windows, an influx of Cuban students, but it also brought our first Asian students from the Philippines as well. About a decade later, we had our first known African-American student, Walter H. Smith, in 1910. Now, it took us a very long time to get these firsts. Obviously, our numbers are better now in terms of minority enrollment. They might not be quite where we want them.
Yes, the current enrollment, at least as a year or two ago, as you know, our current enrollment at the university is over 17,000 students, and that's undergraduate and graduate. And of that number, over 2,000 students are African-American, and there's even a greater number of other minority groups. Also importantly is the student retention, which is generally looked at as 1 year retention from freshman to sophomore year, is in the 80s, mid-80s, about 84% for African-American students, which is very good. And a graduation rate, I believe, is around 56%. One of the issues that the university continues to work on is closing the graduation gap, 6-year graduation gap, between the African-American and minority students, and also white students, and I know that's a prominent feature of the current president and his administration. So we've come a long way. I recall as a student standing on the corner of Church Street and then College Avenue, I believe, and wanting to count the number of students of color I saw come by. It was a long time to stand before I saw them come by.
How do we compare with other universities?
Westchester's been pretty much leader among the state-owned institutions in regard to the diversity and retention efforts, and under the leadership of the Diversity and Inclusion and Equity Office under Dr. Tracy Ray Robinson. It's received national awards and attention for the work that we continue to do. So we've always seen ourselves as a leader to the public outside, but we're also inside trying to push the university to improve and do more.
Yes, so in World War II, we had a number of African-American veterans, including two in particular, Leon Bass and Littleton Mitchell, who came home to continue their education at Westchester, but found themselves facing some difficulties.
Yes, these two both were in the beginning to mid-40s. They enrolled in at Westchester, and also I think Littleton Mitchell stopped out to go to military service, and he's also known for being a Tuskegee Airman. You know the history of the African American flyers, and was very instrumental in that regard. But his story is an intriguing one. He was from Delaware there, and he commuted to Westchester, and if you can believe it, and we do, and we know it's true, from I think Milford, Delaware. And he would get up at 3 a.m. in the morning to ride a bread truck, delivery truck to this area, to commute from there to Wilmington, and then hitchhike his way to Westchester to get an education at a place that at that time would not allow him to take advantage of the accommodations on campus, wouldn't allow him to be housed on campus. He was given a list of rooms that were available by Black community members in the community where he could stay. He was a health and physical education major, and one of the classes that he needed to take to graduate was one in life-saving and swimming. And at the time, the university had to use the facilities of the Y in the community, and he was not allowed because of his color to use and so they were telling him that he can't graduate in the area that he wanted to. He and his family, we would say, pitched a boogie in regard to that with the administration, and the administration had him chauffeured, or driven, I should say, to Temple University to use the pool so that he could finish his degree. He went on to become prominent with the NAACP, statewide director of the NAACP in Delaware, and also upon his unfortunate death a few years ago, was given a tribute by the current president of the United States, Joe Biden. Leon Bass faced similar situations, went on to be very prominent in Philadelphia teacher, but also he was one of the presidents of a student organization before the NAACP, before the BSU and other groups, that was called the College Club. And the College Club was spelled with a K, college with a K and club with a K. So the early 40s, he was president of one of the student groups and was an activist. He was also involved in the military, and he was involved in some of the camps, the internment camps and all of that time, and he was involved in freeing some of those camps. And once again, going into the service and then coming back to Westchester and being unwelcome, shall we say.
Right before the start of the fall semester in 1945, our class of 1919 alumni, John Broadhead, got a call from the governor, who he had been working with, telling him that his freshman daughter would indeed be allowed to live on campus in the fall. She was one of 8 African-American women to desegregate the women's dorms, although men continue to be segregated for decades to come. And even after the official segregation had ceased, unofficial segregation persisted at Westchester and throughout the state system.
Yes, and that's all correct. And actually, when the governor gave that order in the fall, it didn't really take place until the next semester was in January for the women there. And there was a term that was called the six girl room among the African community back then, in which the university just set aside a couple of rooms, or maybe 3, in which they would house 6 Black students. And once you reached the 12th or the 18th, then those students too had to be housed off campus. And also they were being segregated. They were housed with one another. Later, men were permitted to live on campus, likely in the early 50s to mid 50s, but they were also housed together, and being segregated in regard to that. And then it improved as each decade,
So this was an order from the governor that you had to desegregate in 1945.
Well,
Is that what the-
why it wasn't an order from the governor, it was, it really came out of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which said, thou shalt not discriminate. And then if you go back to Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka in 1956, which said you could no longer have separate equals. So truth of the matter is Pennsylvania was cited by then HEW for continuing to operate a dual system of higher education and a segregated. And so the state of Pennsylvania was cited. So what the governor was doing was because federal government and Supreme Court rulings was mandating that those things be done. But if you really follow the timeline, Pennsylvania was still tardy, and doing those things. So I kind of look at it in terms of equity and diversity as being pushed and being pulled. And so I think the country, the university was being pushed in the right direction. Then you had people on campus who was trying to pull the university in the proper direction also.
Yeah.
And even during this time, we had our first African-American trustee, Frances Atkinson.
Yes, Frances Atkinson came to my attention because her family actually sent this picture, I believe, and information about her, because up until that point, many of us thought that Dr. Clifford D. Baptiste was the first trustee member. But she in her own right was one of the founding members of a prominent, nationally known organization called the Links of African-American women who were focusing on education opportunities and civic duty and cultural activities for African-Americans. She was from the Bryn Mawr area of this region. Her husband was a doctor also, and during that period of time. But I'm positive that with her background, and she was involved with it, that she was an advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion for her tenure.
Yeah, I think she was also on board of trustees of the Episcopalian Church.
Yes.
I mean, she was pretty active. So.
Yes.
And then you have the beginning of the Sykes presidency in 1961, which lasted through 1969. Earl Sykes hired the first African-American faculty member, Ruby Jones, and he was also really the first to try to increase minority enrollment through a directed series of administrative programs. And I'm sure you have a lot of stories about his tenure from your time here as a student.
Well, just briefly, Dr. Sykes was president. He was leaving as president the year I came in 69. And then Paul Rossi is coming in as the president. But anyway, in terms of Sykes, one of the things that he was instrumental in doing in the 60s was to convene a human relations council. And again, that was not just something he pulled out of the air and said, this is what we want to do. That was part of what the Commonwealth was being urged to do in regard to becoming in compliance with HEW and the Office of Civil Rights there. But nevertheless, he was an advocate, and that group was very instrumental in trying to advance multicultural student recruitment and faculty recruitment and hires. Interestingly, it was a group of 24 members, mostly upper administration, some of the Black faculty, a few Black faculty that works on campus, and it looked like 2 student representatives, one from IGA, which was the student government, and one from the NACP going back.
So you were not involved, even though you were the president of the Black student.
Yes, and I really think the credit is that because the work of those in the 40s and now in the 60s, that before quote unquote the Black Student Union came on board, the student NACP came on board, at least according to the student newspaper, in 1963 in regard to it. And as we mentioned, is that as far back as the 40s, there were student organizations in student groups. When Sykes was leaving in the spring of 1968, a group of multicultural students presented to the Human Relations Council a list of recommendations to improve recruitment of students and more faculty and to deal with curriculum, and was asking for Black studies in the life. And actually on April 22nd, 68, the presentation was made and they were accepted. And as they were about to be accepted, another splinter group of the Black Student Committee and the NACP objected to what was being presented, and they threatened to boycott and to take militant action if their demands was another.
Was it a little more radical, like more?
It was
radical.
Well, it was similar to what was presented, but they also had asked for all policies and procedures related to African Americans be approved by a committee that they would set up. So the deans, in their mind, would have to get permission from their group that they set up for that. It was resolved. The deadline was for May 5th for that to be resolved, and it did get resolved.
One thing I want to point out too, just if for those of you who haven't been here, of course, we do have an artifact for Ruby Jones, who was we say is the first African American faculty. She was also a student here. Yeah, I don't know if you can, probably we're at the wrong angle here, but you can of course look at it online. And I know, I think it might have even been you, Julia, when you were looking at the book and you're saying, wow, she's a tough grader, you have her great books in there as well. But it's of course, she leaves a strong legacy here with the demonstration school was renamed Ruby Jones Hall after her and is still standing. So yeah, just want to point that out.
After you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Absolutely, as you mentioned, the NAACP in 1963. Another group we had formed was Alpha Phi Alpha, which was our very first National Panhellenic Council fraternity in 1969. Now, this is also our first African-American fraternity. And of course, in 1969, we also had the founding of the Black Student Union. First time Mr. Dowdy came here, I mentioned, hey, this is your corner right here, because pretty much every artifact we have is not only donated by you, but really you've been involved in its creation in some way.
Everybody loves your picture for students.
I bet now
A little more hair.
now I'm voluntarily challenged. But before that, let me say a word or two about the importance of the Alpha Phi Alpha, which was the first charter Black fraternity here on campus, followed by many others, Omega Psi Phi, AKAs, deltas, and the like, the importance of those groups in regard to student graduation and student retention and creating a sense of a community for African American students. Just as the fraternities, these Black student group organizations, the NAACP, the DSU was also important. Each had a common thread in regard to wanting to improve the community in general here on campus and work with the administration in improving and implementing efforts to increase the representation of multicultural students, and at this time particularly we're talking about Black students back then on campus, but also in terms of faculty and staff and recruitment and retention. So that was very instrumental, very important. The other leg that was important in regard to the Greeks and the organizations was the gospel choir. And the gospel choir started in October 1970, and it was student discovered and run. Some of the early leadership was Nate Gaston, who happened to be my roommate from Harrisburg, Elsie Carroll, who's from Chester, who was the pianist, Barbara Ward Farmer from Philadelphia, who was a foreign language major, Spanish, I believe, but she was also an elder in her church and a student during that time. And that was one of the major factors, I think, during my era that helped many of us stay in Westchester, because every Thursday we had gospel choir rehearsal, and whatever the trials and tribulations that we were having during the week was sort of washed away during that moment in the spiritual sense. Where Barbara Ward Farmer also went on to earn her doctorate degree, and she's a bishop, now in her church, and she went on to be a recording artist of gospel music, and this Barbara Ward Farmer and the Wagner Alumni, where she's carried on the tradition of starting gospel groups. She did it in the Philadelphia school system also. So anyway, I wanted to give a shout out in regard to the groups and the organizations. I talked a little bit about Dr. Sykes and Dr. Rossi when he came in. I was a student, from my perspective, was very, very turbulent years. We had the Vietnam War. We had really a transition of Westchester moving away from in local arenas where you had data men, data students, whatever they said, when, not much academic freedom, according to some of the faculty members, and not much student rights, according to some of the students and the like. And the students were really pushing for a bill of rights, for visitation rights, more electives in the curriculum and the like. But we also had, during that time, in I believe 1968, a professor called Dr. Michael Kay, his name was Dr. Michael Kay, who was the first faculty member to teach Black studies. And he was seen as being controversial, not only because of the topic of what he was teaching, but he also supported the Black student groups, VSU and otherwise, during that period of time. And that was not looked at kindly, because then we as Black student leadership joined with student government and other faculty members who were asking the university to get a little bit more progressive, be more open and the like. And as a result of that, there were protests of the administration. There was a sit-in at the administration building. There were a state trooper riot contingent who encouraged us to leave. And I had one foot in the building, one foot out, so I was leaving anyway, to leave the building. And the AAUP, which is the American Association of University Professors, came in 72, did a review of the incidents that happened with Dr. K, who was, some would say non-renewed, some would say fired. and other faculty members who had supported him and Black students and academic rights. Some of them were fired also, and that led to a censorship of the university in 1973. So that was very turbulent with student rights, Black history types of issues, Vietnam War protests, and just a clash of various cultures that was going on. But anyway, that was sort of the tie with those of us who was pushing for diversity was also joined with some of the other activities that were going on campus during that period of time. IC eventually got a vote of no confidence and was shown the door during that time. But as I said, it was a very turbulent time, and the next president came in was Charles Mann.
Yeah. Let me ask a couple of questions though, because this is really fascinating. I know you were talking with one of your fellow classmates at the time, right before we went on. You're talking about, the riot, the police coming in riot gear and marching in formation. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
I was trying to be polite.
I mean, this is the time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Westchester in general, there was cross burning.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just our university. This is the thing at the time.
It was, as I said, there was a student setting, it was a culmination of those activities, what I talked about, and we were, when you sit in, you're supposed to let the heat rest and all that. We thought, and I'll say we loosely, because I always had one foot in the door and out the door. Student government leaders, we all thought that we were abiding by the rules, and the institution sought an injunction eventually, but they did call in the state police, and this was the riot contingent of the state police who assembled on New Street, and busloads were brought in, and they had their riot gear and helmets. And it's the first time I saw a riot night stick up close, and they had to be 3 feet long at least, if not longer, and very unpleasant, there. So as I said, those were some of the turbulent years, and that if you want to know more about censorship and AUP, report in regard to that. Cross burning, another unfortunate situation, which we believe, or I'm pretty sure, was some of our students, enrolled students, at the time, parked a car on Church Street. It was reported came past Erringer, you pronounce that differently, but I say Erringer, there and on to the back of Hollinger Fieldhouse, and proceeded to have a cross and a sheet with KKK painted on it, and to like a flame. Black students came out from Sanderson Hall to extinguish it. Before they could get there to extinguish it, some white students were trying to put out the cross. So that's a very unfortunate. That was part of the times where there were overt incidents such as that, unfortunately, that underscored, in my mind, the climate and how unwelcome students of color were in the eyes of some pockets on campus, while at the same time, there were many faculty and administrators who were advocates, for students of color, minority students.
And students, and
students, yeah.
So I'm sure there were also like protests and things about Vietnam, other things. Were they treated the same way?
Oh, absolutely. Vietnam, if you were a part of what was in the SDS, the students who were democratic, socialists, you were branded as a communist and socialist, and the phrase from some members of the administration referred to them as long hairs.
Right.
And the beatniks and sometimes students who were not abiding by what was then the dress code, like coming before the dean of men, and it was for just like what they call a hippie,
right,
back then. So it was the sign of the times Westchester and many of the state-owned schools were very restrictive in how they ran the institution for students.
That was the big, I mean, you know, the 67, there was a transition time in our society, it was a transition time for university.
Yes.
You know, it's a really fascinating time that you were here, you know, as a student. Oh, yeah, why don't you take it, sorry.
While, you know, the university can never atone for these injustices, they can attempt to redress them in some ways, such as the 2008 institutional apology, you know, put on, directed by Dr. James C. Trautman, and then, you know, suggested by Dr. Carson Carr and others.
Yes, Dr. Carson Carr was a 1958 graduate of Westchester. He approached the university through President Adler, suggesting that bringing to her attention, administration's attention, the activities that went on as far as the exclusion and discrimination and segregation, particularly in the 40s and the 50s, and he suggested that an apology ought to be issued to those remaining living members. Dr. Adler took that request very seriously. She instituted a planning committee in which I was asked to lead to reach out to some of the individuals who are still alive to get their perspective as to what they thought should be done. And there was mixed emotions. You know, some felt that they'd never want to come back to Westchester again. Some felt that time had moved on, leave it alone, and others felt that they would like and welcome the opportunity. And so we decided to move forward, and the activity was held in 2008. We had 30 alums from the class of 38 to the 750 classes of 10, and it was prominent theme was hurt, pain, but a proud to be a Westchester graduate in spite of those trials and tribulations that they couldn't have gotten a better education. And those individuals went on to do fantastic things within their communities and within their profession. A letter of regret / apology proclamation was issued during that time, and it is recorded. So it is part of the university archives, and also a booklet has been transcribed by Dr. Trautman in regard to capturing the reflections that were spoken to by those 30 individuals who attended that event. We also learned that in the mid-90s, there was a group of Black alumni that got together and had a similar event, and nearly 60 to 70 alumni, as far as Black alumni, as far as California, attended that event. It was held in North Wales, Pennsylvania, somewhere in the Philadelphia area, and they developed a booklet of their reflections that's very similar, Aaron has, you know, to what was going on. And one of the news reporters that wrote a story on that phrase that I'll never forget, said that their road to success was scattered with the remnants of racism. Really prominent. Well, one day I'll find out who that reporter was.
Yeah. Well, powerful quote.
Absolutely. When I was talking to Dr. Trautman about this event, he mentioned that it was the only event he could remember where the number of students and people there at the start grew. You know, normally like this was like a 3+ hour event. You know, students are gonna dwindle, but not only did everyone stay glued to their seat, but more people were coming in to listen to their stories, which is incredible. So moving on here in time, we have Kenneth Parent's presidency from 1982 to 1992. Wasn't this when you came back?
This is when I came back. I left Westchester in 1976, graduated in 73, stayed on to be a resident director of Kellinger Hall, assistant director of educational opportunity program, and then went on to Jane University to be the Dean of Student Services slash Affirmative Action Director. Came back 7 years later, entered the Aaron administration as the Special Assistant to the President and the Affirmative Action Director. I sort of skipped over the Mayo administration. That was those turbulent years also. Mayo was brought in to principally get us off of censorship. And that was the primary goal that the board and university wanted to do. And he was able to work with the AUP to do that. And then shortly thereafter, his 7-year, 8-year, whatever year tenure, as he began to put his administration together, as he came on board, he began to make some administrative changes from the old guard to the new guard, and some of the old guard didn't take kindly to that, and some went on to become state representatives in the House of Representatives, and it was reported that that individual's goal in life was to get back at President Mayo. And if you read, Westchester was almost going to be censured again because of the removal of Dr. Mayo. The report was done by AAUP. It's fascinating reading also, but it was damning in regard to his rights, they felt, being violated. The thing that saved the university from being censored at that time was the beginning of the new state system of higher education and the pledge that the structure and the shared governance would change in such a way that some of the issues that occurred during the Rossi and the Mayo would not occur. And so,
This is less local, you know, you have
Yes.
bigger.
well, from the governor's office.
Sure.
It trickles on down. So anyway, Aaron was a academic dean. Mayo went out and pushed him to step forward. He did. He was an acting president for a year, then he became president. I came in '83 and worked in his administration. During his time, one of the first Martin Luther King lunches and the like was really under his administration that was put forward. He also created, is that seconds or minutes? We're getting a few here. Also was very instrumental in making ties with international outreach. He had a campus in Japan, I believe, during his administration. I viewed him coming out of the Rossi and the Mayo year as the healer. You know, one of his themes was family, and trying to pull the university together. Surveys that were done during that period of time is that people outside of the university had a better image about Westchester than the community itself. And you wonder why when you hear, the turmoil, that was going on when you're talking about diversity and the incidents that were going on. You're talking about the climate in it. You spoke up, you can get fired. One of the incidents that and probably people like Dave Flamer, who I should mention, was one of the student leaders where I came on, also Black student groups and Michael Gilmore, who was with the NAACP, is I learned that in my second year, and I was in the higher education opportunity program also, which started in '68, so I was in '69, that internal investigation was done of the program because some people were concerned about students in the program being involved in some of the protests. And the report indicated that the students ought to be students, which was me and Flavor and others, should be aware of that we could lose our funding and the institution could lose its funding, but really they were saying that we could lose our funding. So there are various ways where some faculty were being fired and some students were being threatened in regard to if you didn't toe the line. So anyway, then enter
Madeline Adler. Oh, yes, so she was our first female president. She's noted for her contributions to theater and the arts. But this period, I guess maybe from my interpretation, she in a way continued the healing of President Parent, but I'm sure you have a much more intricate view.
Yeah, she's what I call a long hauler. You know, when we go to prior to Rossi coming on board, President Swope, they were long haulers, and then we had the period of what I call it the short-term presidents. You know, we were 6, 7 years, or so she was there for 16. And she had a management style, leadership style that wanted to have faith and empower, you know, the university community to develop a shared mission and to engage individuals in support, you know, their efforts to and initiatives to improve the university. Under her leadership also was the actual multicultural center itself, as far as a place. Before that, there was a multicultural office where the director had an office, part-time secretary, and then eventually an assistant director office was added, you know, under her time also. And these positions were very important in helping with student retention and to do more than just have a presence of numbers, but to develop programs that help students be retained and graduate and to improve the climate. So she was very instrumental and very beloved. Under her administration, I was graciously appointed to be her executive deputy and also governor relations, while others did long ago, did in my tenure, the affirmative action, social equity types of issues there.
Yes, and that multicultural center, you know, now bears your name, thanks to your contributions. So under the Weisenstein administration, we had the Frederick Douglass statue put up right outside of Phillips. This was thanks to the tireless work of many different people and groups. Of course, the first you have to mention is the Frederick Douglass Institute, founded by Dr. James Trotman, who founded it at Westchester and it expanded to all 14 Apache schools, honoring his legacy. You know, Westchester is the place where he gave his last lecture. So he chose to commemorate it with a statue, you know, commissioned with Professor Richard Blake, the sculptor. And thanks to the donations of, you know, many other people, right? This was able to become a reality.
Yes, Dr. Trotman, as you mentioned, was one of the movers and the shakers in terms of raising the money and the vision of Frederick Douglass on this campus. He also was ably assisted by Mildred Joyner from the social work department, who was sort of the co-arm of the venture, if you will, to pursue the statue. You also mentioned that he being Dr. Trotman, was founder of the Frederick Douglass Institute. Prior to the Frederick Douglass Institute in the early 80s was the Frederick Douglass Society. It's now known as the Society. But that was another effort campus-wide to assist, while I talk quite a bit about students, student life, student retention. And the campus was not very welcoming, not only to students, but to African-American faculty and students of color also. I mentioned, or may not have mentioned, Dr. Jody Harris was one of my mentors, who was one of the directors of the Higher Education Opportunity Program. He commuted from Philadelphia. He resided in Philadelphia. And at that time, there was a faculty staff dining area in Lawrence Center, up there where people would go. And I wondered why he would never partake in having lunch there. He used to always bring a bag of lunch and have his lunch in his car. Think about that. I mean, he was one of the highest ranking African Americans on campus during that period of time, and the climate was so unwelcoming.
And what era again? What year?
This is the 70s.
In the 70s.
Yeah, this is 74, 73, 74, 76. Never said a word, but just
Sure.
observing that how could that be, in regard to that. Anyway, but when I was talking about student organizations, VSU Gospel Choir and the like, there were a number of organizations like FDI, Frederick Douglass Institute, Frederick Douglass Society, multicultural faculty groups that were put in place to try to support and help our faculty of color navigate promotion, retention, and help our administrators navigate upward mobility. So tagline is they were catching hell.
Yeah. What do you think, what was the percentage, roughly speaking, of people of color versus white faculty at the time?
We're probably having about 2%.
2%.
Yeah, very few. Tenure track faculty as of 2 years ago was about 30 out of 600 and something.
Sure.
So it's really two areas. Westchester's come a long way, doing great. 2 areas where we can do better. Faculty of color, recruitment and climate in regard to that, and also, which I know we're working on, is closing a disparity gap in 6-year graduation rate among multicultural students in white schools.
Yeah.
Sorry, Aaron.
Absolutely, no. These people are here to see you, not so much me. Really, the last thing we want to touch on here is, the events of 2020. We had a big Black Lives Matter protest across from the public safety building in response to the National Guard being stationed on campus. After only a couple days, they were removed. This is well after Mr. Dowdy's time. Come on, camera. Good catch. Yes, but also this year, and I think the year before, didn't we win an award, for our ongoing contributions to
Yes, as I mentioned, Westchester continues to make progress and be a leader in regard to diversity, inclusion, and equity. And a national magazine, Issues in Diversity, I believe is the title, awarded Westchester for the 2nd year one of the Outstanding Excellence Award for diversity in general, not in terms of just color, but the whole spectrum of diversity efforts that Westchester has. And I'm proud of the work of the current director, Dr. Tracy Gray Robinson, who's been with us, I think about, still saying us, been with us since 2018, I believe. She's doing a stupendous job as the chief person within that office, and has steered the university to that achievement. So kudos to her and her staff and to the university for that outstanding achievement, while we still have a long way to go.
One of the things that I always think about with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, of course, they're always very good about promoting lots of events across campus. We always have our calendar. I always rush to get our stuff in it. About what everything in the semester has to do with DEI, and that kind of reminded me a little bit. I know you've been out of the administration for a couple of years, but we see that there's a couple tiered approach, right? Aaron, you've done a lot of research, the oral histories, and again, you can go online to listen to nearly 30 oral histories that you conducted over the course of your research, where people really do talk about the importance not only of having diversity in general, but having support structures from the administration, from faculty in their teaching, and also for students and student clubs, to help retention as well. And I'm wondering if, maybe both of you could say a little bit about that. Why is retention so important? Why is like, what is retention? Why is it important? And what did you, Aaron, what did your informants or subjects that you talked to, talk about in terms of strategies for teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So retention, as you mentioned, retention numbers, it's basically the percentage of students of a certain group that graduate after 6 years. There's different metrics, such as matriculation. They can measure it after 4 years, after 8 years. But in general, it's what is the percentage of students that stay at the school and finish their degree there. I talked to 27 different students and faculty of different identities, not only of different races, but also ethnicities, genders, sexualities. And really the most common themes that I charted were student groups, as you said, that feeling of belonging and feeling that at the end of the day, despite that cloud of, things you were facing, you could let go with people of the same mind, in a shared activity. That was something really important to people.
Nice support structure, peers.
Absolutely. Another thing, some of the administrative efforts, such as, the statue we talked about, the apology we talked about, a lot of people who were here before those times really saw those as, Westchester finally coming to terms with, its past in a way. And one more thing is teaching in the classroom, from the current faculty, how they discuss these issues within their class, how to stop students from shutting down when conversations about race or sexuality come up, how to really make people introspective, thinking about their own lives and willing to share their stories in an environment. There's an art to that. There's a science behind it. There's different ways to address that depending on the subject. You really have to be careful in doing that. And, the work that my interviewees and many people on campus have done in these three areas has been fantastic.
Yeah, I was just add briefly, I know we're short on time, is that one of the things that I am proud of the DI office focuses on is the whole issue of inclusion. There.
We're good.
Okay, the issue of inclusion and diversity to some is sort of a numbers game. Do you have a certain number of what's the percentage, and whereas inclusion is more of a behavior in regard to not only having persons of color in board, but including them in the everyday activity and the decision making of the institutions. And that's what I think where we're working, collectively on now is as a university with these conversations about different kinds of relationships across the races, is to really ensure that we're getting at the issue of inclusion.
Right. Great. Well, thank you, for both of you for being here. We'll do the arm bumps here. Are there questions for everyone here? I don't know if they've been posting it or not. Jenna, is there?
There are, let's see here. Let me check the chat. Is there a recording of the WCU apology event that Mr. Dowdy spoke of?
There is, right?
There is, yes.
Who would have it?
A contact help in the
Oh, right,
media,
yes.
digital media office. She would be able to.
Right.
And if that fails, contact me. I have a couple copies.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to unmute.
We are running out of time, but maybe one question or so. Any thoughts? Anybody want to share any thoughts very quickly about your own time here and your own experiences?
Good evening. My name is Lisa Jackson, and I just wanted to make a comment. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, very good. I have my picture on because I'm not looking real good today. But anyway.
Oh, it's a lovely picture, let me tell you.
Thank you. So thank you for this opportunity to share the history, more specifically, the students of color history at Westchester University. I am a proud alumni, and my parents both are. And if you hold up the picture again of the apology, and my parents are in that picture, both of them went to Westchester. They are in the middle. My mom is in the middle, and my dad stands behind her.
What's the last name again? Jackson. Okay, yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting.
So they were there, and they apparently loved it very much because then I went. and then my brother went, and then my sister went, and my son just graduated as well.
That's great.
So apparently they had a great time at Westchester and didn't experience too much adversity and were able to excel in their professions as educators in the School District of Philadelphia, thanks to Westchester, at that time, State Teachers College. So again, great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Well, we're being kicked out of the library. We're on extraordinary hours because the university is still, is not,
In session.
in session. We only have the winter session. So the library is closed and they're waiting for us to end. So I think we're going to have to end there. But please, do visit our exhibition in person. Please visit it online. If you have any other questions, you can send it to museum@wcupa.edu. We'll be happy to send it to Larry, to send it to Aaron, or to answer it ourselves. So thank you very much again. Jenna, you want to close it?
Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a great night, and we hope to see you on February 2nd for the next lecture. Have a great night.